News alert, President Trump is doubling down on his support for Israel, announcing that it is time for the United States to fully recognize Israel's sovereignty over the long-disputed Golan Heights region, a move that would mark a dramatic change in decades of U.S. policy. Happy Friday. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, Fox Business Network anchor Dagan McDowell, Fox News contributor Lisa Booth, Fox News contributor Morgan Ortegas, and in the center seat, Fox News political analyst and co-host of The Five, Juan Williams. And today, you are outnumbered.
Indeed.
Welcome.
Rainy day, dream away.
Well, in some parts of the country, yeah. I mean, the rain isn't making them dream. We pray for the midsection, right?
Yeah, right now, Nebraska's getting hit hard.
All right. Let's roll. President Trump says he backs Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights region it captured in the 1967 war. Israel has long maintained the area is strategically important, and the rise of Iranian influence in Syria and Iran's frequent talks of Israel's annihilation. The president's move also bolsters Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as he faces a tight race for re-election in April. Netanyahu is due to visit the White House next week. The president says his decision is not based on Netanyahu's re-election. He says he is following through on a pledge made by many of his predecessors.
It's been a very hard decision for every president. No president has done it. This is very much like Jerusalem, moving the embassy to Jerusalem. I did that. Golan Heights is the same thing. For years, other presidents have campaigned. They said they'd do it. This is sovereignty. This is security. This is about regional security.
But critics say the move will destabilize the region. 2020 Democratic presidential candidate Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard tweeted this: another example of Trump and Netanyahu putting their own political interests ahead of the interests of our respective countries will escalate tensions and the likelihood of war between Israel, U.S., Syria, Iran, Russia. Short-sighted. Juan, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, this is a radical shift from bipartisan U.S. policy for decades. So, you know, you go back to 1967 when Israel captured this territory, 1981 when they annexed it. No international body has ever recognized the Golan Heights as Israel's. And they do this for a very strategic reason. You don't want to destabilize what is already a tinderbox.
So you agree with Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii?
Oh, yeah. I just think the president has politicized Israel and support for Israel to the point it's very difficult to have an honest conversation about, for example, the two-state solution, again, that was bipartisan U.S. policy for decades, or moving the capital to Jerusalem. I think with Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel's election coming up April 9th, I believe, Harris, the president is taking sides. And so he's politicized this to the point that I think it could help not only Netanyahu, but it help his attempts to woo more Jewish voters here in the United States.
Morgan, when you look at this and you see Tulsi Gabbard saying that it moves us closer to war with that long list of countries, it then becomes in your wheelhouse as national security. How do you see this?
Very differently from my dear friend Juan, of course.
She called you dear friend.
He is. We love
it softens the blow.
Good point.
Listen, I mean, the only entity responsible for destabilizing the region is not Trump. It's not Israel. You have Iranian influence in the region. You have a civil war in which Bashar al-Assad has killed hundreds of thousands of his own people. You have, Syria is completely destabilized from the country it was just 8 years ago when I was living in Saudi Arabia in the Middle East. So what has happened here is that if Israel has effectively been in control of the Golan Heights, right? I mean, this is, not disputed that they have controlled that territory.
About 40,000 people living there.
Everyone has just sort of left it alone, well enough alone. Because of the topography of the Golan Heights and because they have been attacked there several times, there is no Israeli prime minister who could ever be elected who would cede that territory. It's just absolutely not possible because whether it's Iran, Hezbollah, ISIS, whomever, any sort of enemy of the Israeli state would have a huge advantage if they attack there. So while it is a change in U.S. policy, it certainly is a change of the status quo. Effectively, what remains the same on the ground is that Israel controls the territory that they've been controlling.
Lisa, when I was there for the embassy opening last May, you heard the president referencing that. There was talk of what would come next in the relationship. I met with the ambassador there, too, Friedman. What would come next in our relationship? Do you see this as kind of following course?
Well, we're seeing a lot of the same criticisms that President Trump faced when he acknowledged and said that we're going to move the embassy to Jerusalem and Israel. So I sort of see that, somewhat similar. But to the criticisms that President Trump is just solely trying to help Benjamin Netanyahu, President Trump also made that decision back in December 2017 to move the embassy. So, I mean, was that also to help Netanyahu? I think President Trump just sees himself as a pro-Israel president, stands with Israel, and this is consistent with his policy. But I do have a question for Morgan. Can you just talk a little bit about the strategic interest for Israel with the Golan Heights?
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, I mean, if you look, and our viewers could easily Google a map if you see this, you know, Iran already, because of what we've seen, the destabilization in Syria, they basically effectively now have a land bridge and a very easy way to attack Israel, and that's why it's so important that the Israelis cannot give up. That's a great map that we have up there of the Golan Heights. I think it's also important to remember when we look at the conflicts in this region. There are not people that don't have blood on their hands here. There's not innocent, players here. I mean, when you look at Assad, when you look at what the Iranians are doing, and then when you see the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu has been prime minister for at least 10 years, he doesn't necessarily have serious opposition, here. I mean, it's always, a tight election, of course. But to think, that he needs President Trump's help, that's really, I think, starting to get into domestic politics in a way that I just don't think Netanyahu needs.
Oh, interesting. And that map was so critical. We might keep popping it up.
Right.
Because as you see the proximity of Syria and what's happening over there, and we already know that Iran's on the ground over there. We already know that Russia's involved via proxy over there, if not in person.
In Iran, enriched by the bad nuclear deal brokered by President Obama's administration, where we sent, you want to talk about destabilization? We sent $1.4 billion in cash, some of it pallets of cash in the middle of the night, to a nation that was still calling death to Israel, death to the United States of America. We enriched them. We opened Iran up for business, and that money was directly or indirectly funneled into the hands of Hezbollah, rebels in Yemen, to terrorists and nations that want to wipe Israel and the United States off the map. So if you want to talk about destabilization, let's talk about that, number one. Number two, just really quickly, the Wall Street Journal writes an editorial really laying very much what Morgan was talking about, that negotiators for so many years always talked about returning the Golan to Syria as part of any broader peace settlement. Well, this declaration by the president, it acknowledges the new reality on the ground. It sends a message to Russia, the patron of Syria. It also sends a message to the Palestinians about we're not returning to pre-1967 borders. We're standing with an ally and recognizing the new situation on the ground.
Lisa, I see you. We'll come to you, but I want to give you a chance to rebut anything that you wanted to with what.
Oh, sure. So I think, you talk about the Iranian deal. Again, it's Benjamin Netanyahu, I think, trying to encourage the president to pull out of a deal that, in fact, has taken away nuclear weapons from Iran in terms of protecting our ally Israel, which should be the goal. And the goal should be to try to get all these parties, Syria, given the trouble that's on the ground there, Iran, given the fact that they are invested heavily in undermining Israel, Russia, given that they are the patron of both Syria and Iran, to get these parties to come to the table and to work something out. That's why the United States, Republican and Democrat, have stuck to the two-state solution, have said, we're not going to sort of unilaterally make a statement about the Golan Heights that at best
on the
is
ground,
symbolic.
as Dagan was just talking about. And we know this because we know American fighters were killed by the Iranians on the ground inside Syria. I mean, we're leaving 1,000 behind in Syria now. The president taking a relook at all of that. And not just because of ISIS, but because of what has devolved into the situation that we're in now.
Well, I don't think Bashar al-Assad's going anywhere, unfortunately, because I think he's a butcher. But I'm just saying.
But we're not calling for a regime change.
No, but what we're doing is the president said he wanted to pull all Americans out. He said
let's deal with
but
today,
he can't do it.
Because there are 1,000 being left behind.
Right,
General Keane on our air, one of our analysts here at Fox News, has talked about what will be good about that, not just in terms of ISIS. But I want to give you, Lisa, just a quick word.
Well, I was going to say you also just see increased threats to Israel. One, with Iran's footprint in Syria. Also, you look at Hezbollah, the increased inventory of rockets they have. I think it was something like 50,000 in 2006, now 150,000. There's a great op-ed from Congressman Gallagher about it as well. So there's been an increased threat to Israel. So, you know, I think that this makes sense.
All right, let's move on. Meantime, new questions for Democratic 2020 presidential candidates after the liberal group Move On called for all Democratic White House hopefuls to boycott the annual AIPAC conference. Right now, no 2020 Democrats say they're attending this year's event. But it's unclear if that has anything to do with the boycott that was called for. And AIPAC is declining to confirm or deny whether or not they were even invited. One of the only candidates going on the record about the decision was Senator Bernie Sanders, whose office said he's not attending because the senator is, quote, concerned about the platform AIPAC is providing for leaders who have expressed bigotry and oppose a two-state solution. Meantime, several Democrats in Congress are speaking at AIPAC this year. And look at them. Among them, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senator Chuck Schumer, House Democratic Caucus Chairman Hakeem Jeffries. Look at all those fellas and lady. Earlier, President Trump was asked about the climate surrounding the upcoming conference.
The Democrats have very much proven to be anti-Israel. There's no question about that. And it's a disgrace. I mean, I don't know what's happened to them, but they are totally anti-Israel. Frankly, I think they're anti-Jewish.
And a short time ago, Congressman Jeffries was on America's Newsroom and disputed any notion that there is a split between AIPAC, the Jewish community, and House Democrats.
I can't speak for the presidential candidates. What I can speak for is the House Democratic Caucus, who clearly are strongly pro-Israel. I myself, represent the 9th most African-American district in the country, the 14th most Jewish. It's the best of both worlds. I've been to Israel 3 times. I recognize that there's shared values, shared strategic interests that are important. And I think that is the perspective of the overwhelming majority of Democrats in the House of Representatives.
Well, then this also, Morgan, makes some of these Democratic presidential candidates look like a gaggle of gutless wonders. They're worried about Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Ilhan Omar tweeting something mean about them if they go. That's what it looks like.
So, in full disclosure, I've attended AIPAC several times. Many people know I'm
We just want to make reference to the President of the United States touching down at the Palm Beach International Airport. This is ahead of a meeting where he will host Caribbean leaders coming up in the next couple of hours. Of course, the President has made news on a whole host of things. We were just talking about his decision regarding the Golan Heights and the support for Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu and many Israelis on that issue, too, to keep that territory there that they have had since the 1967 war. And so as the president touches down, sometimes he'll give some press availability. He always does what we're watching right now, and that is, of course, a very popular state for him in Florida politically, and he has a home there headed to Mar-a-Lago. But sometimes he'll broaden this out, and we may even hear from him on either end of his arrival ahead of this meeting with Caribbean leaders. So we like to watch and show you these events live. You can hear some people shouting their support of the President of the United States as he's touched down in Palm Beach. And we'll stay on the story as he continues to make news in Florida and has a working day on this Friday. You know what, Juan? I'm curious to know, and you nodded, presidents do this, they go down. But this president is really known for giving a stop and letting reporters just lean in with all of their questions. What would be the first thing you'd want to ask him?
Well, first, let me just say, you're exactly right. This is one of the most available presidents. I think it's the most available president I've ever seen. But that's in keeping with his character. Also, we've never seen a president tweet like this, make use of it, of every
quite
possible
frankly, Twitter
platform.
didn't have the presence it did before.
Well, no, under Obama it did, but not
like
didn't
this.
use it like this. But to your point, the first thing I'd have to ask in what's going on at the moment is about his views on the Mueller report. And I think he got some questions like that as he was leaving the White House. I think we showed it here on Fox. And nobody knows what's in that report that's coming. But you always think, the president is going to have early word. Apparently, he said he doesn't know when that report is due.
All right. Let's pause. He's talking about ISIS in Syria.
Congratulations. I think it's about time.
How do you feel, sir?
Thank you, Trump.
President Pat Shanahan's going to be the Secretary of Defense now.
All right. right, so what we were just watching there, as he was boarding Marine One, I mean, so we've seen him go to Ohio this week as well. As he was headed there, he showed that map that you just saw, and the red signifies what was pre-existing in ISIS just a day ago. And what he has been saying, hold on, he's still shouting.
I will be nominating Mr. Moore for the Fed. You know who I'm talking about. So he's going to be great on the Fed.
Sarah, great job. Don't listen to him.
Thank you, sir. Right there.
All right, I hesitate to speak up. Because I don't want to step on the words of the President of the United States. And as he hears questions shouted, obviously he wants to talk. He was talking about, as you heard him say, Mr. Moore, someone that he's looking at for the Fed. That's been one of the news breaks today. And of
Stephen
course,
Moore, who people watch Fox News know him very well.
So that's true, because he was with the Trump campaign, but he's also been a guest on our air many times. But what I was previously saying, that he gave to a cheering crowd of reporters, which seemed odd to me, because they got the map that he held up on his way to Ohio. But what that means, and that's what we can see from this perspective. So if he actually handed it to somebody who wasn't a reporter, we can't see that. All we can see is the back of the gaggle there. But that's what it looked like. So that map showed, Morgan, where ISIS had been. And the president said within a day or so, you'll see the red go away. He had talked about another region in Syria where it was just littered with red, and that was ISIS, and what we have been able to accomplish to defeat them in those areas.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders popped by the press cabin on, this is Perry, the pool reporter on Air Force One. Sarah Huckabee Sanders saying the following. She announced that the territorial ISIS caliphate has been 100% eliminated in Syria. She directed reporters to the Department of Defense for additional information, and she showed reporters a map of Syria, possibly the map that President Trump had.
Yeah. And we know that that was the one that he had held up, so he fully anticipated that 100% into the ISIS caliphate would happen.
This is, I can't underscore how important this is, not only for the president, but for our men and women on the ground and our allies who have been fighting this fight against ISIS. What you're seeing is the ground, the actual physical territorial caliphate that ISIS put together. You have seen that completely destroyed and dismantled. Now there's a lot of remaining questions. What happens? The Institute for the Study of War has put out a report that many of these ISIS fighters have gone back to Iraq. Now remember, ISIS comes from something called AQI, Al Qaeda in Iraq. It's a group that grew from up there. So there's many historical strongholds in Iraq. So they are defeated in Syria. It's important, but I think the transition that the president is putting to focus our troops more in Iraq, less in Syria, but still having those 200 at least troops in Al Tanaf is important. But you have to continue to watch this group. It will fester. It will grow. What we saw happen in 2010 when President Obama pulled out completely is that this group came back and festered and turned into ISIS. So, today is incredibly significant. It's a really important accomplishment for many of my friends in the military who have fought there alongside our allies and the brave Kurdish fighters. It's a monumental, very monumental day.
All right. I would add that tomorrow marks the 16th anniversary of the start to our presence as such in Iraq, the beginning of the war. The president just tweeted before he exited Air Force One, ISIS uses the internet better than almost anyone. But for all those susceptible to ISIS propaganda, they are now being beaten badly at every level. The president again tweeting, there is nothing to admire about them. They will always try to show a glimmer of vicious hope, but they are losers and barely breathing. Think about that before you destroy your lives and the lives of your family. That from the President of the United States. We are watching the president after he has touched down, headed for his home in Mar-a-Lago, Florida. And as this continues to make news on Fox News Channel, of course, we'll bring it to you. And this on Outnumbered, the Senate poised for a big vote after Majority Leader Mitch McConnell set a date to bring Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal to the floor. Now, the freshman Democrat says critics are manipulating her message. We'll talk about it. Plus, new reporting on how the DOJ plans to handle the upcoming release of Special Counsel Mueller's report and how Democrats are planning to push ahead with investigations no matter what Mueller finds.
They ought to go to work, get infrastructure done, and get a lot of other things done instead of wasting everybody's time.
Welcome back. A new report detailing how the Justice Department plans to handle the release of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report. ABC News, citing a letter from Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein sent to the Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley last June. Rosenstein reportedly writes, punishing wrongdoers through judicial proceedings is only one part of the department's mission. We also have a duty to prevent the disclosure of information that would unfairly tarnish people who are not charged with crimes. Rosenstein also taking issue with then FBI Director James Comey publicly criticizing Hillary Clinton as he decided not to charge her over the private server scandal. Meantime, Comey himself writing in an op-ed published by the New York Times today, quote, I'm not rooting for Mueller to demonstrate that he is a criminal. I'm also not rooting for Mr. Mueller to clear the president. I am rooting for a demonstration to the world, and maybe most of all to our president and his enablers, that the U.S. has a justice system that works. Because there are people who believe in it and rise above personal interest and tribalism. That system may reach conclusions they like, or it may not. But the apolitical administration of justice is the beating heart of this country. Meanwhile, Politico reporting, quote, several top Democratic lawmakers and aides tell us privately they are certain the Mueller report will be a dud. But Democratic probes into President Trump are going to drag on regardless. Here's the president today on whether he is telling his staff not to comply with Democratic investigations. Watch this.
It's just a continuation of the same witch hunt. They know it, and behind closed doors, they laugh at it. It's just a continuation of the same nonsense. Everybody knows. They ought to go to work, get infrastructure done, and get a lot of other things done instead of wasting everybody's time.
So, one, obviously we don't have the report yet, even though everyone's been saying forever it's going to come out, it's going to come out, it's going to come out. But if it doesn't mention President Trump, and it is in fact a dud, which Democrats are reportedly saying, where does it leave the Democratic Party and people like Schiff and Swalwell, who have been telling us for years now that President Trump, there's collusion with President Trump and his team?
Well, I think they talk more in terms of conspiracy. There's no such charge specifically as collusion. But I think what you're going to see, Lisa, is a battle of the spin over this document. And I think what you're seeing is the run up to that right now. And from the Democrats' perspective, I think the key they want to emphasize is, as you just read from the Comey op-ed, that it's been a fair process. It's not a witch hunt. It's not an attempt to undo the 2016 election, which is what Trump has been saying. And from the Republican side, I think they're going to leap and say, well, if the president wasn't directly on the phone with Vladimir Putin, let's forget about this. It's just Democrats up to their old tricks. But I think the key here is that all of us, Republicans and Democrats, should feel that Robert Mueller conducted himself in an impartial way and the president's been treated fairly.
But, Morgan, what would there be to spin if President Trump is not mentioned in the report at all? What would Democrats have to spin from it?
Well, I think this is an important report. And if it's in fact true, I agree with the Attorney General that you should not malign people who have not been charged with a crime. I was very critical. I think I might have been on with you, Dagan, the day that the news broke when Comey did the press conference as it related to Hillary Clinton. And I said, wait a minute, this is awful. You either charge her with a crime or you don't. But disparaging someone from an FBI position or the Department of Justice without charging them with a crime is not what you're supposed to do. So I agree with the Attorney General there. I'd also look at sources and methods. We don't want to release any sort of classified intelligence information. So it's an important report, in my opinion.
Dagan?
Yeah, speaking of Jim Comey, I underlined this from that fabulous op-ed that he wrote in the New York Times today. I am rooting for a demonstration to the world, and maybe most of all to our president and his enablers, that the United States has a justice system that works because there are people who believe in it and rise above personal interest and tribalism. Jim Comey is the walking, breathing, belching embodiment of personal interest. As the Wall Street Journal has said, the editorial page, he has left a trail of legal messes wherever he has trod during his entire career. So this is laughable. And I just want to point out, President Trump never gave in to the left's narrative that he was going to shut down the Mueller report. He resisted that. They prodded him, they baited him, they goaded him into doing it. And guess what? When this report drops, I hope everybody says, oh, President Trump didn't get in the way of it.
So I just want to know, how Rod Rosenstein really fits in. He's number 2 there. He's delayed his departure. He's written this letter that everybody's talking about today. Who's listening to him? What does the new Attorney General, William Barr, have to say about all of this? I have a lot of questions. The attorney who wrapped up the Clinton investigation for Kenneth Starr and took over, Robert Ray, will join me next hour. I'm going to ask him about that. How distracting is it to have a number 2 say, I'm not leaving?
Right. Well, stay tuned for that then, folks at home, for that interview. All right, well, after deciding against his own 2020 bid, former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg weighing in on the campaigns of some other contenders, saying they're apologizing all the time. That debate next, so stay with us.
Joe Biden went out and apologized for being male, over 50, white, everybody else, Beto, whatever his name is. He's apologized for being born.
Sometimes you just...
I can already see the tweets on this one, but we're doing it anyway. How old is too old? New reports that former Vice President Joe Biden is weighing concerns over his age. And he's continuing to mull the 2020 run. The former vice president would be 78 years old on Inauguration Day, making him, if he wins, the oldest sitting president if he runs and then he wins. The New York Times reporting that Biden has discussed 2 ideas to ease voters' concerns about his age. One would be naming a young running mate as a nod to the next generation of Democrats. And 2, a pledge to serve only 1 term, possibly framing his run as a one-time rescue mission for a beleaguered nation. And now, former New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg has weighed in on Biden and the rollout of Beto O'Rourke's campaign. Watch it.
Joe Biden went out and apologized for being male, over 50, white. He apologized for the one piece of legislation, which is actually a pretty good anti-crime bill, which if the liberals ever read it, most of the things they like would be in that bill. They should have loved that, but they never even bothered to read it. You're anti-crime, you must be anti-populist. Everybody else, Beto, or whatever his name is, he's apologized for being born.
Wow. No, he apologized for saying he was born to run. Juan?
I mean, I just think, this is a moment when you have, I think we're about 3 months away, Harris, from the first debate. And we already have, I believe, 15 candidates, and Biden's not even in. I think you're going to have like 20 candidates. You're going to see all kinds of people. And what you're seeing here, I think, in large scale, and this is represented by Bloomberg, is people saying, hey, this younger generation, they come out and it looks like they're playing identity politics or they're apologizing for things that happened because we have such a diverse group, more women than ever. I think there's like maybe as many as 7 women?
Yeah.
7 women running. And so the kind of language, the attitude that you're going to see is totally different. And Bloomberg, of course, he declined to run.
Well, that's interesting. So I brain room requested here at Fox yesterday. There are 206 Democrats who filed indicating that they want to run.
Well,
now, they're not in it yet, but that's a big pool of people.
Joe Biden's biggest challenge is not his age. It's the fact that he has not proven himself ever to be a formidable candidate. You go back to the last actual competitive race that he had if you look at his Senate results, was 1972, which was the first Senate race he had ever ran. You look at his last race in 2008 against Christine O'Donnell, he absolutely trounced her because she was a terrible candidate. He has 2 failed presidential bids.
I am not
under
a
his
witch.
Well, exactly. He has 2 failed presidential bids under his belt. And I think one of his challenges is going to be the same challenge Hillary Clinton faced in her support for the 1994 crime bill. When you look at the fact that 4.4 million of the 2012 Obama voters that sat home in 2016, more than a third were African American. And this has already been an issue that's been reported that's come up with Biden in his previous support for the crime bill.
So if our camera grabs the big wall right now, you'll see, is it just a number with a question mark? Voters have indicated it's about ideas and moving forward, as Juan put. It's not about energy or anything like that. So if we look, up until this point, Donald Trump was the oldest on Inauguration Day at 70. I've sat across from the man. He's got a ton of energy. Yeah. It is about ideas. So is Joe Biden bringing the fresh and new? He would be 78 if he were to win and be inaugurated.
Well, it's certainly good for Republicans if he announces Stacey Abrams, and it's good for Republicans that Beto O'Rourke, or Robert Francis, is running for the presidency. Because why? Because they're not running in Texas and in Georgia, where there could be two incredibly competitive Senate races if Abrams and were to run with Biden. So if they do that, they're just hurting their own chances as it relates to getting the Senate back.
Do you think age is one of those things that people hinge a vote on?
Be careful here, because I'm aging as I sit here.
I'm aging with you.
Be careful.
You know, if you show signs that age is getting in the way of your energy, of your ability to campaign, and your ability to think logically. But I think Joe Biden brings one thing to the table. He does have an ability to laugh at himself.
He does.
And he does talk, he will talk, despite the apology about Vice President Pence, talk off the cuff and shoot from the hip. I really wanted Mike Bloomberg to run for the nomination because my few encounters with him over the years, he's not nice, and he's a terrible retail politician.
Wow.
So now we get to hear his commentary from the peanut gallery because he didn't have enough guts to get in the mix.
Ooh, Friday frankness. Let's move on. President Trump defending his criticism of the late Senator John McCain and pushback from lawmakers inside of the Republican Party. The impact this could have on voters. Is there one? We'll debate.
President Trump defending his criticism of the late Senator John McCain. The president, in an interview with Maria Bartiromo on Mornings with Maria on the Fox Business Network, blasting McCain for his 2017 thumbs down vote on repealing and replacing Obamacare. Watch this.
You people bring it up. I don't bring it up. I'm not a fan. He was horrible what he did with repeal and replace. It was what he did to the Republican Party and to the nation and to sick people that could have had great health care was not good. So I'm not a fan of John McCain, and that's fine.
It was a skinny repeal, by the way. It was not a full repeal and replace. Meantime, the Washington Post reporting on the president's strategy in going after McCain, quoting a GOP operative who worked with Trump's team who says, quote, a significant number of voters in this country have seen politicians that lie to them, make promises, are disingenuous, who are basically not themselves. They aren't real. When the president does things like this, he is real. There's a currency for that. While many GOP senators have not weighed in on this, some have spoken out to say they're not happy with Mr. Trump's approach. Juan, I'm going to go to you first on this, but I will say this. I said it yesterday on the Fox Business Network. Silence is accepting the unacceptable when it comes from anybody. And I will sit here and say this attack on Senator McCain, given the fact he's dead, and his family, who is in mourning, is petty, and it's mean, and it's appalling.
Well, you know, so the question is, are there people who feel differently than you do, Dagan, who see this as was described in that piece as authentic and genuine, or see John McCain, even in death, as still a representative of establishment Republican politics and President Trump as the disruptor who would go again? I just think it's uncalled for, and what we've seen from his daughter, both Megan, who's known to our audience, and Bridget, who might not be known, is to just say, hey, you know what, even if you don't like John McCain, act with some decency. We're still grieving.
I know, but I know the whole discussion about the dossier and his aide that came out last week. I know all of that, so people can tweet that at me. But this is coming from somebody whose mother is battling cancer. And if somebody in my hometown pulled this nonsense after a loved one died, I would be basically. I would be stabbing their tires every night to make sure that they couldn't even get out of the driveway.
And I think that is understandable, which is why I think a lot of people sympathize with Meghan McCain, considering the fact that her father's death was very recent. So there's a very real pain there, and this hurts. But in fairness to the president, he was asked the question about this fight, and he responded. And I do think he has, in fairness, has an ability to be frustrated at Senator McCain for his role in the dossier.
He brought it up on Saturday.
No, I'm not done,
He brought it up on Saturday.
But Dagan, let me finish. Considering the fact that the dossier helped lead to an investigation that has led to former associates ending up in jail, also his own family having to testify.
I want to get Morgan in
No,
here.
but what I'm saying is it's fair
I hear
to be frustrated.
I
what I do not agree with is the president's response and the manner in which he goes about it. But is he not supposed to answer a question
he brought it up. He brought it
and
up.
It's not like
Morgan,
the media, but it's not like the media is taking a hands-off approach with everyone who has passed away and examining their record.
Morgan. But as it relates to the dossier, my understanding from everything that we've known publicly is that the FBI had that for at least a year before the senator handed it. And not only that, Christopher Steele seemed to have been some sort of paid, potentially an informant or a source for the FBI. So when the allegation that this investigation started with McCain handing the dossier, actually we need to dig deeper about why it did start, what happened in the FISA, in those FISA documents. That's a very important discussion.
You know, I'll just say this real quickly. We started this conversation as there may be some people who don't, who have political reasons for wanting to talk about McCain, so on and so forth. Dignity is something that we always need to dial up. But I will say, if you'll recall back in the 2008 campaign, Senator Chuck Schumer said of John McCain, an unappealing candidate, done great things for our country, but he doesn't particularly emphasize with the plight of the average person. There were people who had some criticisms of him as he was running. This is posthumous and it's hurtful for his family. But I just put that out there as more information.
And I speak with personal hurt and nothing more than that, but I stand up for that. She's sticking to the plan, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, defending the Democrats' Green New Deal ahead of a scheduled vote in the Senate. But could the progressive firebrand actually be writing the playbook for the GOP? We debate.
Ahead of next week's planned Senate vote on the liberal Green New Deal proposal, Democrat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez again defending the resolution on late-night TV, claiming that the narrative is being manipulated by President Trump and other critics. Watch this.
If we're going to make progress, we need to declare our North Star, and our North Star is 100% renewable energy. It's Medicare for all. It's tuition-free public colleges. It's investing in technology and renewable resources and electric vehicles. But the resolution, the Green New Deal, is the vision of what we need to accomplish in the next 10 years.
Meantime, President Trump says he hopes Democrats keep this Green New Deal thing up.
You look at this Green New Deal, it's the most preposterous thing. Now, I don't want to knock it too much right now because I really hope they keep going forward with it, frankly, because I think it's going to be very easy to beat.
So when I talk to what I would call establishment Democrats behind the scenes, they sort of roll their eyes at AOC. They don't think that she's great for the party, but she clearly has captured the energy of a certain part of the electorate. Do you agree with her pushing this narrative of the Green New Deal, free college, Medicare for all?
I like it, but it doesn't matter what I think. It's a poll show, and the polls show voters like it. They like the idea that somebody is starting the conversation about what we can do in terms of climate change in the country. I think the reason that Mitch McConnell's bringing it up is he wants to emphasize, this is going to take away your hamburgers, no more airplanes, and he's going to try to use this to absolutely stigmatize her and the Green New Deal and Democrats who support it as unrealistic and wanting to punish America. So it's a political stunt, I think, is what it is.
But, Lisa, you've been involved on the Hill and on campaigns and that sort of thing. Is this a smart political tactic from the Republicans, from Mitch McConnell specifically, to force this vote?
Well, absolutely, because you have a handful of senators who are running for president, and President Trump would love to have this conversation about the Green New Deal that would devastate jobs and also would increase electricity and energy prices in these Rust Belt states, which is the path to the presidency for President Trump in 2020. So he would love to have this conversation in a state like Wisconsin, a state like Ohio, and a state like Michigan. And I would say it's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez who embarrassed herself with the rollout of the Green New Deal with the frequently asked questions document, where she talked about giving economic security to people who are unwilling to work and talked about farting cows.
Dig in. Kristen Soltis Anderson is on this network a lot. She's a pollster, and she's gone into detail with us about how important climate change is to young people on all sides of the aisle. Are the Republicans missing that opportunity to have a private sector approach to climate change?
You were sitting here reading my mind, Morgan Ortagus. Vegas.
been
And
on together so
if I
long.
point at you, it just means I love you. That's going to be ultimately the approach. Talking about how natural gas, which is plentiful in this country, has helped reduce emissions out of power plants by 30% since 2005, focusing on the jobs that are created. Again, more fuel efficient cars in this country, what private industry is doing, rather than this on high and mighty idea that, by the way, her ideas at AOC will drive up the cost for the people in this nation who can't afford it. The poor, the working poor, lower income Americans cannot afford gasoline that's $5 more a gallon.
Absolutely. Well, we will have more Outnumbered in just a moment.